Today I'm gonna talk about Indonesian historical fact. So Indonesia's fight to independence wasn't just about politics, but it was about people. For over 400 years, every Indonesian lived under foreign rule, dreaming of freedom. Students, workers, soldiers, and leaders came together with one goal, and that is to build a nation of their own. In this presentation, I'll share of the story of how Indonesia rose up through courage, unity, and sacrifice to finally declare independence. From key events to powerful leaders, we'll uncover how this movement shaped the future of our country. So, first, how did the movement start and what is the historical background? In 1908, students in Batavia or Jakarta is founded in the Association Budi Utomo, the first native political society. This event is often regarded as the birth of Indonesian nationalism because it was established to a political tradition which cooperation between the young Indonesian elite and the Dutch colonial authorities was expected to lead to acquiring some degree of independence. The next chapter in the development of Indonesia was nationalism, was the founding of the first mass-based political party of the Syarikat Islam, the Islamic Union, in 1911. Initially, it was formed to support the indigenous entrepreneurs against the dominating Chinese in the local economy, but expanded its scope and developed a popular political consciousness with subversive tendencies. Other important movements that led to the unfolding of indigenous political thinking is the Dutch Indies, where the Muhammadiyah and Islamic reformist social religious movement founded in 1912, and the Indonesian Association of Social Democrats, a communist movement founded in 1914 that spread Marxist ideas through the Dutch Indies. Internal disunity in the latter would later lead to the formation of the Indonesian Committee or PKI in 1920. So how did the Japanese everyday hero rise? Well, so first, what began as a small village as a Japanese organized militia or PETA soon became something more ordinary. The Indonesian farmers, shopkeepers, students training secretly and united by dreams of a free homeland. The second is betrayal and control. In March 1944, the Japanese authorities grew suspicious, and then they shuttered the Putra, an earlier nationalist group in Indonesia, and forced everyone to Jawa Hokokai, an organization under tight Japanese watch trying to snuff out the spark of independence. Third is A Promise in Saigon. It takes place on Vietnam. So fast forward on to August 1945, in war-torn Saigon, Sukarno and Hatta stood before General Terauchi. He laid out Japan's shocking plan to turn power over immediately. Hope surged, but the end of the Japanese rules was still uncertain. Fourth was the youth's bold move. Back in Jakarta, young patriots couldn't wait. They snatched Sukarno and Hatta for a day, determined to force their leader's hand. Their messages was clear: declare freedom now, or we will. So the last one is a nation is born. On the morning of 17 August 1945, though a word of Japan's surrender reached Jakarta in a simpler room, microphone crackled to life. Sukarno's voice rang out, and then he said the following messages, which is, "We proclaim Indonesia's independence," and just like that, centuries foreign rules to come to an end. And so the next one is which events marked the turning points where the balance of power shifted in favor of Indonesian independence. So The end of World War II marked a turning point. Japan's defeat in 1945 created a power vacuum which Indonesian nationalists swiftly capitalized on. On August 17, 1945, Sukarno, a prominent nationalist leader, declared Indonesia's independence and became the nation's first president. This bold declaration, however, was not immediately recognized by the Dutch, leading to a fierce and bloody guerrilla war. And for 4 years, Indonesia has been waged a relentless struggle against Dutch attempts to reassert control. Uh, so they tried to colonize us again and control. The Indonesian people, determined to achieve their sovereignty, endured significant hardships and sacrifices. Finally, on November 2, 1949, the Dutch formally acknowledged Indonesia's independence, marking the end of the colonial rule. So, what are the main strategies used by the VOC for bilateral trade and kingdoms in the Indonesian archipelago? So, first is factories, not freedom. So the VOC or the Dutch Indies East Indies Company uh, didn't just trade; they built company run factories across the islands. These weren't factories like we imagine today, but centers of control, where local goods were collected under strict rules. And second is there's no real local rulers. So the Indonesian rulers were uh, pressured into like unfair deals, forced to trade with only the VOC, and this was a partnership because it was an economic control and masked as a cooperation. Third is monopoly on nature. So the VOC controlled where crops could grow, like the dirt or the land, like cloves in Ambon, nutmeg, and mache, mache only in Banda. This wasn't about farming, it was just about power over nature and profit. So they're just using them like slaves. Fourth is forced deliveries and hidden taxes. Farmers didn't get to choose what to grow. The VOC demanded specific crops, and locals had to sell them at fixed, unfair prices. And if you live in the VOC controlled areas, you paid contingencies, taxes in the form of crops, not money. And the last one is all of Europe, all for Europe, nothing for locals. This system was meant to help the island. It was designed to ship wealth to Europe to make Europe more richer. While Dutch traders grew rich, local farmers had no rewards and they just starved and stayed poor and underdeveloped without any educations. And then so these are the leaders that partake on the movement in Indonesia. So first we have Soekarno Hatta. Soekarno Hatta is the first president of Indonesia, nationalist leader, or the co-proclaimed independence on August 17, 1945. His contribution was he was a powerful speaker and a founder of the Indonesian National Party or PNI, and he united diverse groups under the idea of independence. Second is the writer Muhammad Hatta, the first vice president of Indonesia, economist, diplomat, co-proclaimed independence with Sukarno also. So Muhammad Hatta was known for his political vision and strategic diplomacy. Hatta was critical in gaining international recognition for Indonesia. So the third one is Sultan Syahrir. He was the first prime minister of Indonesia and he was a socialist intellectual and early resistance figure. He pushed the diplomacy and was active in youth and underground movements during the Japanese occupation. So, and the fourth is Tan Malaka. He was a revolutionary thinker and a communist leader. He advocated for independence through struggle and anti-imperialism. So the last one is Ki Hajar Dewantara, an education reformer and founder of the Taman Siswa school system. He uses education as a tool to national awakening for the motto Tut Uri Handayani, lead from behind. And then, so there's the social economic impacts on Dutch and Japanese occupation. So according to this article, economic impacts of the economic policies under the Japanese occupation is about regulating trade and doing away with traditional export markets. This was liquidating business, and those under foreign ownerships were appropriate. The industries were crucial to the war, like oil, communications, and mining, were brought under the military control. The agricultural production exports and traditional Indonesian markets were hit hard because the economic restructuring as part of its war objectives, which failed because of poor management alongside inflation in the Greater East Asia. Uh, Co-prosperity sphere from 1948 onwards. So here are the timelines. So here's the timeline. A timeline of Indonesian history from 5000 BC to 2010. So we have the 5000 BC. So Indonesian have the evident earliest human habitation. Evidence in Java emerges. 2000 BC, Austronesian migration from Taiwan began, and early settlements, agriculture, pottery, and trade networks developed. And here are the early kingdoms. So in 850 AD, early Hindu Buddhist kingdoms like Kutai rise, and 600 to 699 AD, the Sriwijaya Empire dominates Sumatra, controlling sea lanes. And 799 AD, the Borobudur and Prambanan temples were constructed. In 1200 and 1499, the Majapahit Empire unites such much of modern Indonesia, and its Islamic sultans or sultanates in 1012 1200, Islam spreads through bustling trade routes. In 15 to 1599, powerful sultanates like Aceh and then Demak emerge, and then there's a cultural blend, which is like coastal regions become Islam, and some areas becomes Hindu and Buddhist. And in 1602, the Dutch East India Company or VOC established. They started colonizing Indonesia, and then in 16 to 1899, the Dutch control gradually expands across the archipelago. They did not demand us the uh, independence in that time, and then the Dutch ethical policy begins, aiming for native welfare. And then in 1908, the Budi Utomo was uh, founded. The society was founded, and then in 1928, Youth Pledge Sumpah Pemuda proclaims a unified Indonesian national identity, and then the leaders emerge like Sukarno and Hatta. In August 17, 1945, the independence is declared by Sukarno, who becomes the first president of Indonesia. In 1945 and to 1949, the Indonesian national revolution against Dutch occupation rages. In 1955, Bandung Conference established the non-aligned movement, and then in 1965, the September 30th movement leads to anti-communist purge, and then in 1967 to 2010, so there's the New Order of Biak. It's called the New Order of Biak. So in 1967, the New Order of Regime begins, and then 1998, there's the Reform era or Reformasi commences, and then 2004, the direct presidential elections are held, and then 2004 again, there's an Indian Ocean tsunami that devastated Aceh province.